I got something fresh in my mind I'm going to talk about. So I'll go first on this one because
All right.
I recently saw a movie and it was not Dune Part 2. Not yet, anyway. Uh, I'll probably be going to see that one soon, though. But, um, I found myself last night or yesterday in the mood for, it just randomly struck me. Dead Meat had uploaded a video to YouTube where they go into the Bloomhouse basement and look at props from their horror movies, and then they get attacked by the bear from the new horror movie Imaginary. And I thought to myself, oh yeah, that's right. I saw the trailer for that. It looked like it was going to be a dumpster fire. I'm kind of in the mood for a potentially shitty horror movie. I think I'll go see it. And so I did. And while it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, it also wasn't anything to shake a stick at. My bar for horror movies now is basically Talk to Me, so this pales in comparison. Um
Fair
that
enough.
being that being said, though, it was still enjoyable. I was expecting better, though, from the producers of Five Nights at Freddy's and Megan. Um so and that's what they advertised it. They're like, from the people who brought you Five Nights at Freddy's and Megan, and it is not up to par with either of them. Um,
Right.
that being said, though, there are parts of it that are good. So the premise of this movie is that this lady named Jess, when she was younger, the house she was living in, she had an imaginary friend that was actually like um a demon, a familiar that was kind of latched onto her. And because she's super creative, it kind of like fed off of her power. And she escaped all that, and she kind of like suppressed the trauma of what happened, and because she was like 5 years old when it happened, so she grows up to think that because her dad, something happened with like her dad and the entity and all that, and her dad ends up in a nursing home with his brain kind of broken. And in her mind, what happened in her childhood was all just like a bad experience. Like her dad went crazy, and she had to go live with her grandma for a while. She doesn't remember anything that actually happened, but her subconscious does, because she became a famous writer and wrote a book based off of her experience, a children's book, um called where the bad guy is a giant spider monster you know
Okay.
um so years later, she gets married to a guy who has two daughters, and she becomes their stepmom. And they move it back into her old childhood home. And the youngest of the two daughters finds a teddy bear named Chauncey and befriends it, um, and and it becomes her imaginary friend. Well, of course, as I'm sure you already figured, this imaginary friend is not very imaginary. He's in fact quite real, and things start getting weird. Now, the teddy bear itself is an inanimate object, but it's being controlled and possessed by the entity that is, um, you know, latched on. They're the real Chauncey. And all I can say is that this has got to be one of those movies where, like, there's a lot of horror movies where characters make stupid decisions. This movie, at least the first part of this movie, the decisions they make in this movie have to be among the absolute dumbest I've ever seen. Like, there
Oh,
is there is complete obliviousness here to a lot of this. Like, I mean, a perfect example is the stepmom and the dad are in the bed at night, and the girl is comes in and she's like, Chauncey's playing hide and seek with me, and she hides in the bed and all that. And the stepmom, she hears noises in the hallway, and she like peeks over the blanket to look, and she can see the fucking bear standing at the edge of the bed, just its ears, and she sees it go down, and then she looks under the bed and looking for it, and because the dad takes the opportunity to pull a prank and have the daughter, jump down and scare her at that point and jump scare the audience. She completely forgets about what she saw and moves on like everything is normal. Like, just because you got jump scared by your stepdaughter doesn't mean that you forget the weird shit that you just saw. I would still be looking for that,
Right.
Another example is like they can hear her through the vent talking to her imaginary friend, and then she starts doing the voice for her imaginary friend. It sounds like she's doing the voice of the friend, but it is actually the entity talking. It's just mimicking her when it talks, and it's very creepy sounding. So she'll talk normal herself, and then the entity will talk back, and they hear it through the vent, and they're like, "Oh, isn't that cute? She's doing voices for her imaginary friend, having a conversation with it." And I'm like, "No, this isn't cute. I would be calling the therapist right now." Which, to their credit, they do call the therapist later, after things have already gone to shit, though, because this is the whole point of this movie. What the entity wants is it wants Alice, that's the girl's name, to go on a scavenger hunt of items that she has to gather together in order to perform a ritual to open a door into another dimension where all imagination comes to life. But the entity is just trying to get her there so that it can keep her there forever with it. And and it's like basically like a fucked up Narnia, and the scavenger hunt is simple things at first, lock of hair, yada yada, something that makes you sad, something that makes you happy. Well, then it starts getting more dangerous, like something that will get you in trouble, something, and then eventually down to something that hurts. And that's when the shit starts to get crazy, because some of the stuff you have to do, some of the stuff that the entity makes people do to hurt themselves is pretty fucked up. And in the case of Alice, she was about to impale her hand on a nail. Which she saw as a dandelion because of the way that, it was messing with her. So, like, I don't want to get too deep into all of it, because I as mediocre as this movie is, I still kind of want people to see it, because there are some parts in it that are actually genuinely good that I don't want to spoil per se, but like, because this movie has like 3 plot twists. And
okay.
one of them is actually good. One of them is an actually good plot twist, which in hindsight I should have saw coming, considering the plot, the movie's fucking title. But like, at the same time, like, the way it was presented throughout the movie made it very believable. So I thought that part was well done. But then there's like 2 other plot twists later, and one of them is predictable and stupid, and the other one is just there to make the movie longer, quite frankly. Like, literally, there are 2 different times I thought this movie was going to end, and it kept going. So, yeah. But I will say, so one of the plot twists is good, and then when they do call the therapist in, the girl who plays Alice in this movie is pulling double duty in this scene as both herself and the entity Chauncey arguing with each other, and she puts on such an amazing performance in this scene doing both of them, and like the emotion that she conveys, and like the real like fear and anger and sense of betrayal, and it was insane. And this is the part where the movie actually starts to get kind of good. So the beginning of the movie is like, the first act of the movie is your typical, like, it's your typical horror droll. It's like it's your very paint by numbers, mark all of your, like, entity horror movie boxes for the most part. The typical jump scares and cliches. There are like 1 or 2 good jump scares in this movie. The rest of them are extremely predictable, and they really only happen in the first act of the movie. After once it hits the second act, they pretty much almost completely void of jump scares for the rest of the movie. So it's only in the beginning. The first act of this movie is pretty terrible. But then the second act, once the therapist comes in and everything that happens after that, is actually very interesting. And not only the scene with her, but in particular, there's this scene where the therapist is like, I recognize this, and she's showing the stepmom these videos on a laptop of these other kids that have been through something similar, and like and the entity told them to hurt themselves too, and like kind of took my breath away, because one of the kids she interviewed, he pulls up his hand to show that he cut his own thumb off, and I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Jesus.
Yeah, so like this is the part where the movie actually starts to get good, and a lot of the good twists come in, and some revelations about Jessica's childhood and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, all right, this is where it gets good.
This is definitely a movie that I want to see.
But then we get to the third act, and the movie starts to fall in quality again a little bit. The third act of the movie is equivalent to one of those video games where you're going through a long hallway full of doors and avoiding the thing chasing you. Like,
okay,
it is literally that for the entire third act, basically. They are in the imagination world trying to avoid the real Chauncey, and get Alice back out. And that's also where one of the movie's stupid time padding the runtime twists comes in too. There is a very interesting, intense scene, but I will with Chauncey and the older sister. But I will tell you this: as intense as the scene itself is, Chauncey himself not only looks extremely fucking stupid, but also is extremely stupid. Because they're as big and strong, and he very easily takes down a character at one point, and he's basically a killing machine, and there are several moments in the third act where he has the upper hand on the other characters. He has them dead to rights, and he just stands there and fucking watches as they escape. He just stands there and watches the whole time. I mean, and I think it does kind of tie into one of the twists that they have and what the whole point with that was. But still, like, I don't know. I still feel like if he really, because he had an opportunity, he had a golden opportunity to kill the older daughter at one point. Like, it was right there. And he just stands in the corner and stares at her the whole time. He just stands there and stares. It's typical horror villain stupidity. Also, this movie has an old lady exposition character. Like the crazy old lady that was like watching them, standing in the yard watching him through the window, and they're like, oh, that old lady's creepy. And then she comes out and she is like, oh, I remember you when you were a child and you had that imaginary friend. Sometimes you had me convinced he was real, that kind of thing. And then, like, it turns out that she actually knows everything about everything that's going on, and she's been studying it for years, and she's,
Jesus Christ.
She's like, she's like, after you left, I dedicated my life to figuring out what was going on in that house, that kind of shit. I call her old lady exposition. She basically exists to explain shit to the audience. That's what she's there for.
Fair. Okay.
So this is a very paint-by-numbers movie with a terrible first act, a really good second act, and then a mediocre third act that doesn't deliver on the horror as much as you think it would. It is... In fact, sometimes I swear to God it leans more comedy than horror. But when it is trying to be horror, it comes across more thriller than anything.
So would you say it's a dumpster fire?
No, not at all, because it has enough redeeming qualities to keep it from... I would say it's more like a smoldering garbage can. Anything. Yeah.
Well,
It's
would you put that in a rating?
a 6.5 out of 10. Not bad enough to be
Okay.
not bad enough to be a 6, but not good enough to be a 7. It's like just
Okay.
just a smidgen above, just a smidgen below average, you know.
Okay.
So on the I would say it's just okay. You know,
Okay.
it's an okay movie, with a lot of flaws, but a few moments that are good. They did stick the landing. I'll give them that. The ending is actually good and kind of funny. So
Okay.
I will give them that. You know, it's a traditional horror ending that there's just like a really fucking funny moment in the ending that I don't want to spoil. So,
Okay.
there's actually quite a few moments in the movie that are genuinely funny, but for the most part, it's just like scares that don't land and like honestly the best and probably most intense part of the movie is when Chauncey is fucking around with the older sister's boyfriend because he's tripping out on Molly and so there's moments where Chauncey is like, this is actually where one of the good jump scares in the movie is actually right here. So I won't get into it too much, but like that part actually, you know, had some good intense moments and some like, you know, well designed like background imagery and whatnot. But for the most part, this movie, you know, a lot of good horror is more about show don't tell. Well, this movie doesn't understand that. This movie is all about the tell and it's very loud about it. So
Okay.
also, it's a movie where there's somehow a lot happening, yet nothing happening at the same time. I don't know how else to explain
Okay.
that, but it seems like there is a lot of shit going on in this movie, but it's a whole lot of nothing burger shit. You know, there's a lot. You know,
Okay.
it's like, you know, teenage drama moments and stuff like that. It's weird because it's a movie. It moves fast. It's a very fast moving movie, very fast paced, but it feels longer than
Uh-huh.
it feels longer than it is. um, yeah, I don't know how else to explain that. This movie sits in a perpetual oxymoron middle ground, where it somehow both succeeds and fails at being what it set out to be at the same time. I,
Yeah.
you know, uh, and yeah. Oh, I will also say about this movie again, no spoilers, but let's just say very very light on any kind of gore or violence. It is more about, or it tries to be more about atmosphere than anything, and it does get that part right sometimes, but um let's say it I will also say though the movie definitely teases a lot of buildups that don't pay off, which is to say, Dead Meat probably won't be doing a kill count on this one. um
Right.
so the movie is surprisingly tame. I wasn't expecting it. It feels almost PG-13 in a way. It's not, but it feels like it should be. So,
Right.
um, but yeah, so a 6.5 on that one. That's all I can really say about it. Some solid acting, some good atmosphere at points, a couple good jump scares, you know, and a good second act, but then everything else around it falls apart. So,
Okay.
you know, it is a movie that is barely being held together by the few pieces of duct tape that make it work. So,